Alright, boys and girls, we got ourselves a little bit more updates for Outlaw Rogues in terms of Roll the Bones and True Bearing. Blizzard has posted a blue post, and I'm going to be doing a summary here of exactly what they plan to do, what I agree with, what I don't agree with in case I don't agree with something here, and how Blizzard is currently addressing Roll the Bones and True Bearing. So they want to do two things with Roll the Bones. Before we cover what they want to do, they want to address exactly what Roll the Bones does. 1. Roll the Bones cooldown reduction is a fun mechanic to play, and it's been a passive mechanic in the past with combat rogues. True Bearing is much stronger than any other single roll buffs on average, and yes it is for PvP and PvE. I mean, you get your stuns back, you get your mobility back, you get your adrenaline rush back, you're getting a lot of buffs, and if they gave it back to defenses, that'd be awesome, but you know, that'd be a little bit strong at that point. That being said, Blizzard wants to make two changes with Outlaw Rogues in 7.2.5 regarding True Bearing. 1. They want to give True Bearing added as a passive, call it Restless Blades, which is a mechanic that combat rogues had, but tune it so it rewards you half a second of cooldown reduction per common point using a finisher. That's not a bad idea, because when you make part of the True Bearing mechanic passive into the spec, then it becomes options of, hey, even if you go for Slice and Dice, you're not really truly losing this mechanic fully. But then the second part is what kind of offset me a little. True Bearing will remain as one of the 6 Roll the Bones buffs, but will be tuned down from 2 to 1 second cooldown reduction per combo point. We're serious about balancing each of the 6 individual buffs against each other, and True Bearing at 2 seconds is clearly out of line. And this is where I gotta just facepalm, because this is one of the things Blizzard likes to do. If you haven't been around playing World of Warcraft, you should know that Blizzard likes to nerf things if they're too good, even if the reason they're too good is because every other option sucks. Now, with this change, if this change were to go through, because this is not 100% guarantee that this will go through, but what would this change do? By giving a True Bearing half a second as a passive, and then making True Bearing itself down to a 1 second cooldown. For PvE and raid environments, it'll still keep RNG to the Roll the Bones mechanic, but it'll give you a lot more capabilities, because then the only bad buffs will be a single Grand Melee buff, a single Buried Treasure buff, which is your energy regen, Grand Melee being attack speed, and a single Shark Infested Waters, unless you have your cooldowns, because that's the crit buff. Every other buff either is a True Bearing or generates combo points, which allows you to have a pseudo True Bearing capabilities. So if you get broadsides on your own, you can technically keep it, because it is True Bearing in a way. If you get Jolly Roger, you can keep it. If you get True, it kind of gives you True Bearing. If you get True Bearing, you're fine. So it opens you a few more options, but it doesn't take out the RNG, because then you still have a few buffs that are just not that great. And again, all these buffs, I'm applying that for PvE and PvP, broadside and Jolly Roger. For PvP in particular, the second part about the True Bearing being a 1 second cooldown reduction rather than 2, I think will offset the ecosystem and the environment that Outlaw Rogues brings into an arena or even a BG environment. One of the strong suits of Outlaw is if you are saving your cooldowns, like your artifact weapon, your mark for death, and if you are rolling for a True Bearing, then you have a viable combo together in order to stun lock your enemy. One of the strongest suits of Rogues, and this is something that's been true about rogues for the longest time, is if you're able to lock down the enemy back to back to back, a stun into a stun into a stun. This is something we've seen with combat rogues back in WoW, where you're able to use your shadow reflection to kidney the enemy, then cheap shot, then kidney again. We were able to see this right now with Subtlety, that are able to cheap shot the enemy back to back to back. And then we're seeing the same thing with Outlaw Rogues if they have their artifact weapon and their mark for death, which are fairly decent cooldowns, and an RNG chance for a True Bearing. Then you're able to use your cooldowns and your artifact weapon in order to between the eyes the enemy, between the eyes, and then between the eyes again. You're able to stun lock the enemy. That's one of the advantages of an Outlaw Rogue, and I feel like if that's something an Outlaw Rogue couldn't do, I feel like the viability of the spec might drop. And this is basically what this would do, is it would drop the viability of a spec being able to lock down a target. Now, when you're looking at the current capabilities of Outlaw Rogue artifact weapon and True Bearing capabilities in terms of its cooldown reduction for your stuns, a 2 seconds per common point at 6 common points because of deeper stratagem. With 6 common points, you're reducing your cooldowns by 12 seconds. 6 common points equals to 12 second cooldown reduction. With this change to be in 1.5 seconds per common point, you look at a 9-second cooldown reduction. That 3 seconds might be not, I don't want to say the word game breaking, but definitely might take away some of the fun and the fun PvP feel from Outlaw Rogues. Mainly because you won't be able to stun lock the enemy like you used to be able to. That's what makes you viable, that's what makes you powerful, that's what makes you PvP playable. They could solve this by allowing Outlaw Rogues more damage in PvP though. So there's ways of going around this. If they make Outlaw Rogues hit harder, let's say like for example, as many rogues will see this and will probably have experienced this, let's say a Death Knight or a Paladin stuns you, and then the pop wings or pop whatever Death Knights pop these days, like the dragon, and they burst into you in that stun. The amount of damage those guys can deal is a lot. It's in some cases they will kill you, in some cases they will be really close to killing you. You'll be with very low health, so recovery from that will be a little bit like dire. But an Outlaw Rogue, when you stun lock somebody in a single stun and you stick a few run-throughs into them, it doesn't feel quite as powerful. It's not quite as dire, but what's dire is the capability to stun you and then again, because the damage really comes through all those stuns. But if they allow Outlaw Rogues to just be like the one stun kind of guy with less capabilities for you to be able to combo the stun back to back to back, and if they were to buff our damage so then we can do similar damage to that of a Paladin in a single stun, then I'll be fine with it. But this is all they talked about so far, so if they are going to be nerfing the cooldown reduction for Roll the Bones while making it a little bit more accessible as a passive, I'm okay with it, as long as they do adjust this spec appropriately. And sometimes the Blizzard isn't going to adjust the spec for PvP. They might adjust it for PvP, they might not. So this is something that's kind of up in the air, but if they are going to go through with this isn't a terrible change, although they would have to take a look at what is making Outlaw Rogues viable, at least for PvP. And if they could just tune our template to be a little bit stronger, just an average, if our sustained damage was a little stronger and our burst in a single stun was a little bit more applicable, so we could bring more of what we bring to the table, then I'll be okay with this. But if they basically took Outlaw Rogues as we are right now and applied this fix, then Outlaw Rogues I don't think would be as viable for Arena. There would be a little bit more fun for BGs because you can get your cooldowns back, but for Arena, yeah, I don't really know how that's gonna go. Oh, also they're talking about taking away the energy regen mechanic for our Adrenaline Rush. So I don't know how that's gonna go. That's gonna be less of a good buff to run. So we'll have to see how that kind of goes. But anyway, this is what I have for you guys. Let me know what you think about the Roll the Bones possible true bearing change. Again, possible, no guarantee, no 100% or anything like that, but just something Blizzard might end up doing. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.